Okay, step away from the vehicle, now. Hands where I can see them.
I'm loading groceries into my car. Am I being detained, yes or no?
Suspicious activity call. Don't get smart. Step back.
I pressed the fob locks click. You have
Call
no
your
legal
supervisor.
basis.
Turn around,
I'm
hands
complying
behind
under
your back.
protest, and this is going to court.
Step away from the vehicle. Now. The voice came sharp and loud, cutting through the ordinary noise of a grocery store parking lot. Shopping carts rattled. A car alarm chirped somewhere down the row. The smell of hot asphalt mixed with the faint sweetness of overripe fruit drifting from a nearby trash bin. It was late afternoon, the sun low, throwing long shadows under the parked cars. The woman froze for half a second, her hand still gripping a paper grocery bag heavy with canned food and vegetables. She turned slowly. A uniformed police officer stood a few feet away, one hand resting on his duty belt. Eyes fixed on her like she had just been caught in the middle of something criminal. "Is there a problem, officer?" She spoke calmly. No raised voice, no sudden movement. She placed the grocery bag gently into the open trunk of her sedan and kept her hands visible. "You don't match the vehicle. Step away and show me some identification." His tone was already hardened, rehearsed, like he had decided how this would go before he ever spoke. "This is my car," she said. "I'm loading groceries." She held up the key fob and pressed the lock button. The car responded instantly. Lights flashed, locks clicked. "That doesn't mean anything. I need you away from the vehicle." People began to slow as they passed. A man pushing a cart glanced over his shoulder. A woman loading a minivan paused, watching without meaning to. The woman took a breath. The air felt heavier now. "Officer, am I being detained?" The question landed between them like a challenge. The officer stepped closer. "Don't get smart with me. I received a call about suspicious activity." Suspicious how she asked. "Loading groceries." His jaw tightened. "I'm asking the questions here. Step back." The distance between them shrank. Authority pressed forward. The casual normalcy of the parking lot began to warp into something tense and dangerous. She complied, taking one slow step back. Her face stayed composed, but her eyes tracked everything. The badge number on his chest, the body camera blinking red, the way his posture shifted when he realized people were watching. A phone came up across the lane. Someone had started recording. "I live 5 minutes from here," she said evenly. "My name is on the registration. You're welcome to check." Her voice was controlled, deliberate, the way someone speaks when they understand the weight of every word. The officer didn't respond. He reached for his radio, then stopped. Pride flared across his face. Backing down now would mean admitting a mistake, and he wasn't ready to do that. "Turn around and put your hands where I can see them." The order echoed louder than it needed to. Around them, the parking lot felt suddenly silent. Carts stopped rolling. Conversations died mid-sentence. The woman stood still, groceries forgotten, the open trunk gaping behind her like evidence in a case that should never have existed. At that moment, to every stranger watching, she was just another black woman being questioned by police for doing something painfully ordinary. No one yet knew the truth that would soon turn this routine act of humiliation into a legal and moral catastrophe. To understand how a routine grocery run turned into a constitutional violation, you have to step away from the parking lot and rewind the clock by decades. The woman standing beside that sedan did not arrive at that moment by accident. She was born in a narrow brick row house on the south side of the city, the kind of neighborhood where sirens were part of the night soundtrack and cracked sidewalks told stories older than the people walking on them. Her mother worked double shifts as a hospital aide. Her father drove a city bus until his knees gave out. Education was not a luxury in that household, it was survival. As a child, she learned early how authority sounded. She learned which voices demanded obedience and which demanded respect. She learned to lower her eyes in certain spaces and raise her hand in others. Books became her refuge. Law books became her weapon. By the time she was 16, she had already decided she would sit on the side of the courtroom that decided outcomes, not begged for mercy. College came with scholarships and exhaustion. Law school came with isolation. She was often the only black woman in the room. Professors mispronounced her name. Classmates assumed she was there because of diversity, not discipline. She responded the only way she knew how, by outworking everyone. She graduated near the top of her class, clerked for a respected appellate judge, and built a reputation for preparation that bordered on obsession. Years later, when she took her oath as a justice on the state Supreme Court, her parents sat in the gallery, holding hands, crying silently. She had spent her career deciding cases involving police misconduct, unlawful searches, racial profiling, and civil liberties. She had written opinions that limited abuse of power. She had overturned convictions when evidence was tainted. She believed in the law not as an idea, but as a shield. She did not carry herself with entitlement. She carried herself with restraint. Power, she believed, worked best when it was quiet. The officer confronting her came from a very different road. He grew up in a suburb where lawns were trimmed and police cars were symbols of safety, not fear. His father had served briefly in the military. His uncle wore a badge. Authority was never questioned in his house. It was respected because it was assumed to be right. He joined the force in his mid-20s. The academy taught him procedure compliance and command presence. It did not teach him humility. Early evaluations described him as confident, assertive, proactive. Those words followed him through his file, even as complaints quietly stacked behind them. There were traffic stops that escalated too quickly, pedestrian detentions that lasted too long, verbal warnings about tone, written complaints from civilians who said they felt targeted, disrespected, humiliated. None of it ended his career. Most of it never reached his performance reviews. Each time the system absorbed the friction. Each time he learned the same lesson. Push hard enough and nothing really happens. By the time he walked into that parking lot, he believed in patterns. Certain people belonged in certain spaces. Certain cars drew suspicion. Certain explanations sounded like lies. He had been rewarded for acting on instinct, not punished for being wrong. Two lives shaped by authority. One defined by surviving it, one defined by wielding it. They were always going to collide. They just didn't know it would happen between shopping carts and grocery bags on an ordinary afternoon. The parking lot came back into focus like a lens tightening. The sun had dipped lower, throwing a harsh glare across windshields and chrome bumpers. Heat radiated up from the asphalt, pressing against skin. What should have been a forgettable moment stretched out thick and uncomfortable. The woman reached into her purse slowly, deliberately. "I have my registration in the glove compartment," she said, "and my identification is in my wallet." Her movements were careful, calculated. She knew how quickly a routine stop could turn into something irreversible. The officer shook his head. "Don't reach for anything." His voice carried farther now, louder than necessary. "A signal." She stopped immediately, hands returning to open air. "Officer, I'm complying. I'm asking you to articulate the reason for this detention." The words were precise, legal, calm. That was when the mood shifted. People were no longer just passing by. They were stopping. A man leaned against his car, pretending to scroll on his phone while his camera pointed directly at the scene. A woman whispered something to her teenage daughter and gently pushed her behind the open door of their SUV, eyes never leaving the interaction. The officer noticed. His shoulders stiffened. His authority was no longer private. "I don't need to explain myself to you," he said. "You fit the description." "What description?" she asked. "Suspicious individual near a vehicle." "That's not a description," she replied. "That's a feeling." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone muttered, "This is ridiculous." Another voice said, "She's just shopping." The officer's jaw tightened. He took half a step closer, invading the space again. "Are you refusing to cooperate?" "No," she said. "I'm refusing to surrender my rights without cause." That distinction meant nothing to him. He gestured toward the open trunk. "What's in the bags?" "Groceries," she answered. "Receipts are inside." He didn't look. He didn't need to. His decision had already been made. "Sir," a man finally spoke up from a few cars away. "She showed you the keys." The car unlocked. "Mind your business," the officer snapped. "It is our business," another voice said. "You're doing this in public." The crowd had crossed an invisible line. Phones were fully raised now. Red recording dots blinked like warnings. The officer glanced around, eyes darting, recalculating. Each witness felt like a threat, not a safeguard. "You're escalating this," he said to her. "You are," she replied evenly. Silence followed, heavy, pressurized. He reached for his radio, hesitated, then dropped his hand. Calling a supervisor would mean explaining. Explaining meant doubt. Doubt meant weakness. And weakness in his mind was unforgivable. "Turn around," he ordered. "Am I under arrest?" "You're being detained." "On what grounds?" "Failure to comply." Several people reacted at once. "That's not true. She's cooperating. This is wrong." The officer raised his voice. Step back, all of you. No one moved, not completely. The woman inhaled slowly. She understood the calculation happening behind his eyes. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about control, about not losing in front of strangers. Officer, she said, her voice steady but firm. I am a sitting justice on the state Supreme Court. I am asking you one last time to reconsider this course of action. The words hung in the air. He stared at her. Then he laughed short and sharp. Anyone can say that. You can verify it, she said. At the station, he replied. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone swore under their breath. A woman shook her head, slowly, disbelief etched across her face. The officer stepped behind her. The sound of metal echoed as handcuffs came free from his belt. This is being recorded, someone called out. Good, he said. Let it record. The woman closed her eyes for a brief second, then turned as instructed, placing her hands behind her back. The cuffs snapped shut too tight. The click was loud. Final. In that moment, the parking lot no longer smelled like groceries and gasoline. It smelled like something older, something familiar. Fear, power, silence enforced. And every person watching understood they were witnessing more than a misunderstanding. They were watching a line being crossed with consequences that no one there could yet fully see. The handcuffs closed with a sound that carried farther than it should have. A sharp metallic click. Final. The officer pulled them tighter than necessary, the cold steel biting into her wrists. Her shoulders tensed for a brief moment, then settled. She did not cry out. She did not argue. She stood still, spine straight, chin level, refusing to give the scene what it wanted from her. Around them, time seemed to slow. A grocery receipt fluttered out of one of the bags in the trunk, lifted by a small gust of wind, then skidded across the asphalt. A cart rolled unattended until it bumped softly into a bumper. Somewhere, a car door slammed shut too loud in the silence that followed. This is unbelievable, a woman whispered. The officer ignored her. He guided the woman forward with a firm hand between her shoulder blades. Not violent, not gentle, just enough pressure to remind her who was in control. Each step felt measured, deliberate. Her shoes scraped lightly against the pavement as she walked past open mouths and raised phones. Every movement was being captured, every angle, every sound. As they reached the patrol car, the officer opened the back door. Get in. She turned carefully and lowered herself onto the hard plastic seat. The surface was slick, unforgiving. The smell hit her immediately. Old sweat, disinfectant, stale coffee. The door closed with a hollow thud that echoed inside the small compartment. For a moment, the world outside became muffled. Voices blurred into indistinct noise. She sat upright, hands cuffed behind her back, wrists already aching. She rolled her shoulders slightly, testing the tightness, committing the sensation to memory. Details mattered. In the front seat, the officer paused before starting the engine. His hands hovered over the steering wheel. He glanced at the rearview mirror and met her eyes. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Not remorse, not doubt. Calculation. He turned the key. The patrol car pulled out of the parking lot slowly. Too slowly. Heads turned as it passed. Phones followed. One man raised his hand in a helpless gesture as the car rolled by, as if apologizing on behalf of the entire scene. The drive to the station stretched on. Red lights reflected across the windshield. Sirens from another unit wailed somewhere in the distance, unrelated but unsettling. Inside the car, neither of them spoke. In the back seat, her mind moved faster than the vehicle. She replayed every word, every command, every refusal. The lack of reasonable suspicion, the escalation, the detention, the arrest, the tight cuffs, the witnesses, the cameras. She thought in statutes and precedent, not emotion. This was not panic. This was preparation. In the front seat, the officer's confidence began to thin. He adjusted the mirror again, shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. The silence pressed harder than shouting ever could. He had expected resistance, pleading, anger. He got none of it. What he got was calm. As the station came into view, a low, concrete building washed in fluorescent light, his grip tightened on the steering wheel. This was the point of no return. Paperwork, reports, names, verification. The car rolled to a stop. He got out first, opened the rear door, and gestured for her to step out. She did carefully, the cuffs pulling at her shoulders as she straightened. A couple of officers near the entrance glanced over, curious but not alarmed. To them, this looked routine. Inside, the air was cooler, sterile. Footsteps echoed off tile floors. The woman was guided past a desk, past a bulletin board covered in notices into a processing area where the rhythm of the place continued uninterrupted. Keys clinked. A printer hummed. Someone laughed at something off to the side. No one yet realized what had just walked through their door. The officer handed over the arrest paperwork with a clipped explanation. Suspicious activity. Failure to comply. Interference. The words sounded hollow even as he said them. The woman stood silently, eyes forward, wrists aching, the weight of the moment settling in. This was no longer a parking lot misunderstanding. This was a constitutional injury, unfolding step by step under fluorescent lights, with consequences that were about to reach far beyond this room. The processing area moved at its usual pace, indifferent to who stood inside it. A printer spat out forms. A radio crackled with a routine dispatch call. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, flattening everything into the same pale tone. The woman was guided to a metal bench and told to sit. She did. Her posture remained composed even as the cuffs pressed deeper into her wrists. A female officer stepped forward to inventory her belongings. Phone, wallet, keys, the grocery store receipt that had been folded neatly inside her purse. When the wallet opened, the rhythm of the room changed. The officer's eyes paused, not for long, just long enough. She pulled out a card that did not look like the others. Thick, official, embossed. A seal caught the light. The officer tilted it slightly, then looked up at the woman sitting in front of her. "This is yours?" "Yes," the woman replied. The officer said nothing. She looked back down at the card, then at the name printed beneath the photograph. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She stepped away from the desk and walked toward the interior offices without saying a word. The arresting officer noticed. His shoulders stiffened. He followed her with his eyes, a faint crease forming between his brows. A minute passed, then another. A door opened. A man in plain clothes stepped out, older posture, sharp eyes alert. He took the card from the officer and examined it closely. He didn't rush. He didn't dismiss it. He read every line. "Where is she?" he asked. The woman was brought to her feet and escorted a few steps forward. The cuffs were still on. The man stopped in front of her and met her gaze. "Justice," he said quietly. "Yes." The room seemed to exhale all at once. The man turned slowly toward the arresting officer. His voice stayed calm, but something in it had hardened. "Did you verify her identity?" The officer hesitated. "She claimed to be." Claimed. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked back at the credentials in his hand, then at the officer again. "This is a sitting justice on the state Supreme Court. Her name is public record. Her photograph is public record. Her rulings are taught in law schools." He paused. "How did this get past you?" The officer's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. A thin sheen of sweat appeared at his temple. He glanced around as if looking for support that was no longer there. "She was suspicious," he said weakly. "Suspicious of what?" No answer came. The cuffs were removed immediately. The metal scraped softly as they opened. The woman flexed her wrists once slowly, the red marks already visible. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The man turned back to her. "Justice, I am deeply sorry. This should not have happened." She met his eyes. "This should never happen to anyone." The officer took a step back as if the floor had shifted beneath him. He was no longer in control of the narrative. Every decision he had made was now exposed under a harsh, unforgiving light. Another superior arrived. Then another. Low voices filled the space. Questions came fast. Who made the stop? Who approved the arrest? Who failed to intervene? The arresting officer stood alone, arms stiff at his sides, staring at a spot on the wall. The confidence he had carried in the parking lot was gone, replaced by something raw and unmistakable. Fear. He understood now. Not just who she was, but what she represented. Every ruling, every precedent, every consequence that followed abuse of power. He had not detained a nameless stranger. He had handcuffed the law itself. The woman gathered her belongings calmly. Phone, wallet, keys. She slipped the credentials back into place with steady hands. "I will be requesting all reports, all footage, and all documentation related to this arrest," she said. "You will have it," the man replied immediately. She nodded once. No anger, no triumph, just certainty. As she walked toward the exit, every eye in the room followed her. The building felt different now, smaller, less secure. Behind her, the officer remained frozen in place. Finally understanding that the moment he tried to dominate, had just become the moment that would define the rest of his life. The story did not stay inside the station for long. By the next morning, a shaky vertical video from the grocery store parking lot was everywhere. The angle was imperfect, the audio distorted by wind and distance, but the essentials were unmistakable. A black woman, grocery bags, a police officer escalating without explanation, handcuffs, silence. The clip ended just as she was placed into the patrol car. Within hours, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. By nightfall, millions. People paused it frame by frame. They slowed it down. They replayed the moment she pressed the key fob and the car lights flashed. They replayed the command to turn around. They replayed the click of the cuffs. Comment sections filled with anger, disbelief, and something darker. Recognition. Local media picked it up first. Then national outlets. Headlines sharpened as new information emerged. Detained while loading groceries. Arrest made without explanation. Identity withheld by police. When her name finally became public, the tone shifted again. A sitting justice on the state Supreme Court. The legal community reacted instantly. Former clerks, law professors, civil rights attorneys. People who had argued in her courtroom. People who had lost cases in front of her and respected her anyway. They spoke with one voice. This was indefensible. The city released a brief statement expressing concern and promising an internal review. It satisfied no one. Behind closed doors, the machinery of consequence had already started moving. Body camera footage was pulled. Dispatch logs were reviewed. The original call that triggered the stop was traced back to a vague report suspicious person near a vehicle. No description of criminal activity. No allegation of theft. Just suspicion. The justice filed her lawsuit quietly. No press conference. No interviews. Just a meticulously drafted complaint citing constitutional violations, unlawful detention, false arrest, and civil rights infringement. Every allegation anchored to timestamps, policy language, and precedent. The video evidence made defenses collapse before they could be built. Internal affairs interviews followed. The officer was questioned about his decision-making. Why he escalated. Why he ignored evidence. Why he failed to disengage when witnesses intervened. Why he did not call a supervisor. Patterns emerged. Previous complaints resurfaced. Stops that had ended without arrest but left civilians shaken. Detentions justified with vague language. Warnings issued. Training ordered. No real consequences imposed. This time there was nowhere to hide. The department placed the officer on administrative leave within days. His badge and weapon were surrendered. His name removed from the schedule. The union issued a cautious statement about due process. It changed nothing. Public pressure mounted. Protests formed outside City Hall. Lawmakers called for answers. Advocacy groups demanded systemic reform, not apologies. The investigation expanded beyond one officer. Supervisors were questioned, policies examined, data reviewed. Disparities that had once been buried in spreadsheets were now highlighted in bold. Stop rates, search rates, arrest outcomes. The patterns were no longer abstract. They had a face. Weeks later, the findings were released. The officer had violated departmental policy. He had violated state law. He had violated the Constitution. He was terminated. The city moved quickly after that. Settlement negotiations began. The number discussed was large, larger than most. Enough to make headlines, enough to make the point unavoidable. The justice accepted it without comment. She did not celebrate. She did not gloat. She redirected the attention back to the issue that mattered. "This is not about who I am," she said in a brief written statement. "This is about who is protected and who is not." The officer did not make a public statement. His career in law enforcement ended quietly the way many lives are altered. Not with drama, but with finality. What remained was impact. Policy changes followed. Training mandates, new reporting requirements, early warning systems that could no longer be ignored. None of it erased what had happened. None of it restored the hours taken from her life. But it changed the calculus for the next person. The grocery store parking lot returned to normal. Carts rolled, bags were loaded, people came and went without incident. But the system that had allowed that moment to happen was no longer untouched. And that was the point. What happened in that parking lot was not a misunderstanding. It was not a lapse in communication. It was a clear failure to follow the law. Under the Fourth Amendment, a police officer cannot detain a person without reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed. Loading groceries into a car is not a crime. Standing near a vehicle is not a crime. Looking like someone who does not fit an officer's expectation is not a crime. Suspicion must be based on facts, not feelings. Once the woman demonstrated ownership of the vehicle, any justification for continued detention collapsed. At that moment, the officer was legally required to disengage. Continuing the encounter transformed it from a brief inquiry into an unlawful seizure. The handcuffs turned it into a false arrest. There is another principle that matters here. Asserting your rights is not obstruction. Asking why you are being detained is not resistance. Remaining calm and verbal is not non-compliance. Courts have repeatedly held that refusal to consent, refusal to answer questions, and verbal disagreement do not create probable cause. Using those actions to justify escalation violates constitutional protections. But law is only part of the lesson. This incident exposes how implicit bias operates in real time. Bias does not always announce itself with slurs or shouting. More often it hides behind words like suspicious, doesn't match, or just checking. It fills in gaps when evidence is missing. It treats ordinary behavior as threatening when performed by certain people in certain bodies. The officer did not see groceries. He saw a narrative he was trained socially and culturally to accept without questioning. Once that narrative formed, every new piece of information was filtered through it, even contradictory proof. For viewers watching this, there are practical lessons that matter. If you are stopped, prioritize safety over being right in the moment. Keep your hands visible. Move slowly. Speak clearly. If you can safely record, do so, or ask someone nearby to record. State facts. Ask if you are being detained. Ask if you are free to leave. Do not consent to searches, but do not physically interfere. If you are a witness, your presence matters. Recording matters. Calm verbal intervention can matter. Saying this is being recorded can change outcomes. You do not have to argue. You only have to document. And if you are ever in a position of authority, the lesson is heavier. Power demands restraint. Uniforms do not grant infallibility. The law does not bend to ego. Every interaction carries consequences beyond the moment, beyond the individual, beyond the scene. The final lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. This case reached justice because the woman knew the law had resources and had a platform. Most people do not. The Constitution is supposed to protect everyone equally, not only those with titles. So the question is not whether this should have happened to her. It should not have happened to anyone. The real measure of justice is not how the system treats those at the top, but how it treats those with nothing to shield them except their rights. That parking lot became a classroom. The arrest became a case study. And the lesson is simple. Ordinary actions do not justify extraordinary force. Bias is not suspicion. And authority without accountability is not public safety. What do you think should change to prevent this from happening again? Comment below.